Good afternoon. The first item of business this afternoon is a debate on motion number 5549 in the name of John Swinney on approval of the Local Government Finance Scotland Order 2013 draft. Can I invite members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons, and I call on John Swinney to speak to and move the motion. Cabinet Secretary, 10 minutes please.
So today's order seeks agreement to the main allocation of revenue funding to local government for 2013-14 to enable local authorities to maintain and improve the vital services on which our communities across Scotland depend. It also seeks agreement to the allocation of additional money for 2012-13 for changes in funding that have taken place since the 2012 orders were discussed and approved by Parliament. Before I get into the detail of this order, I would like to reiterate that the partnership that the Scottish Government established with local government back in 2007, based on the principle of mutual respect, has freed up councils from central government micromanagement and continues to deliver real benefits for the people of Scotland in the design and delivery of public services in their localities. Building on that partnership, we have agreed joint priorities regarding the delivery of better outcomes and a programme of public service reform informed by the report of the Christie Commission. Following a joint review with COSLA, we have agreed a package of measures to strengthen community planning and single outcome agreements as the best means of councils, the National Health Service, the police and other public sector bodies working together with the voluntary sector and communities to deliver better services and outcomes for all of our local communities. This partnership working is vital, and I will continue to listen to and to challenge local government as we fulfil our respective obligations. The importance that we attach to the community planning agenda is illustrated by the significance that is included in the whole theme of partnership that runs through the Government's response to the Christie Commission and is reflected in a number of areas of joint working between different areas of the public service and principal area of significant innovation in adult health and social care, but in joined together through the community planning activities that Mr Mackay and Councillor Pat Waters, former Councillor Pat Waters, has taken forward and which has now been agreed jointly between the Government, the local authority sector and our wider public sector partners. That will structure much of the joint working that is undertaken between at local level. Turning now to the detail of today's order for 2013-14, it's the second year of the current three-year settlement, and although local authorities were advised of the provisional allocation for 2013-14 at this time last year, there have been a number of changes that have taken place since then, and I will provide more details on these later. In 2013-14, the Scottish Government will provide councils with a total funding package worth almost £10.3 billion. This includes total revenue funding of £9.7 billion and support for capital expenditure of £552 million. Today's order seeks Parliament's approval for the distribution and payment of £9.5 billion out of the revenue total £9.7 billion. The remainder will be paid out as specific grant funding for which separate legislation already exists or will be distributed later. I will bring a second order before Parliament next month to pay out the £70 million to compensate all councils that budget to freeze their council tax again in 2013-14, which will be the sixth consecutive year that the Scottish Government has funded the council tax freeze. There are a range of local authorities already that have decided to freeze their council tax, and I expect a range of other councils to follow suit as they take decisions in relation to their budgets in council chambers the length and breadth of Scotland. The most significant changes that have happened in relation to the 2013-14 allocations were the transfers of responsibility and the accompanying resources for the police and fire services from local government to the new Scottish Police Authority and the new Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, respectively. Following agreement with COSLA, this has resulted in a sum in excess of £1.2 billion being removed from local government funding. The other significant change is the transfer of responsibility for supporting vulnerable people in meeting their council tax liabilities from the Department of Work and Pensions to the Scottish Government and local authorities following the abolition of council tax benefit. This comes with a funding transfer of £328 million, £10 10% less than the council tax benefit currently paid in Scotland. In England and Wales, less money is being provided too in this basis. The Scottish Government has provided an extra £23 million of funding for our new council tax reduction scheme in 2013-14. Together with local authorities who are contributing £17 million, we will fill the gap left by the United Kingdom Government to make sure that those who get help with their council tax just now will have access to the same support in 2013-14. The remaining changes, amounting to £8.2 million, are in respect of £3 million for free personal and nursing care, £3 million for family support funding, £1.5 million for looked after children, and £0.7 million following the transfer of responsibility for administering the Blue Badge scheme. As well as seeking approval for the 2013-14 funding allocation, the order seeks approval to distribute an additional £58.5 million that was either held back from the 2012 order or had been added to allow councils to carry through a number of agreed spending commitments which have arisen since the 2012 order was approved last year. I will.
Lewis MacDonald. Sorry, could we have Mr MacDonald's microphone? Mr MacDonald, is your card in?
Thank you very much. The Cabinet Secretary, I am grateful to him for taking the intervention. He made a commitment in December 2011 that no council in Scotland should receive less than 85% of the average of the revenue allocation to councils as a whole. Given that he has reported on the transfer of resources relating to police and fire, can he tell us now what percentage of the revenue average will be allocated to Aberdeen City Council in 2013-14?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think the point that Mr MacDonald is getting at is the point that Mr Rennie has raised with me, and I've explained to Parliament before, is that we had a commitment to establish a funding floor of that no authority would receive 85%, less than 85% of the Scottish average, and we calculate that essentially at the outset of the spending review. And that is applied for a fixed period over the spending review, as is the other floor that is added to the local government settlement. And, of course, as we applied that at the spending review in 2011, that was delivered for the City of Aberdeen, and on the basis of that calculation, it is consistent during the 3 years of the spending review. That issue will, of course, be revisited when the spending review period elapses.
Willie Rennie.
The Minister has given a rather complicated explanation. The reality is that it's 79% and it's 20 million short of what Aberdeen was promised. They were promised 85%. They're only getting 79%. Of course, the budget's changed, but the reality is Aberdeen has been short-changed.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Mr Rennie's made the point a number of times, and I've tried to be as helpful as I possibly can be in explaining the realities of the local government finance formula, which are that we make calculations about the floor arrangements by agreement with local authorities at the spending review period. At the spending review period in 2011, the 85% floor for Aberdeen was established, as it was for the City of Edinburgh, and has been fulfilled for the duration of the spending review period. So that commitment has been unreservedly delivered by the Scottish Government. Now, to return to the changes for 2012-13 that the Government is making, £27.5 million will be allocated for the Teachers' Induction Scheme, £9 million for youth employment opportunities for all, £5 million for additional worker resulting from the 2012 local government elections, £3.5 million to help with the introduction of curriculum for excellence, £3 million for family support funding, £1.5 million for looked after children, and £1.5 million for and personal and nursing care. These additional sums are being provided to help local authorities fund the additional tasks that have been identified during the course of the current year. I should also explain that the total revenue funding paid out to local authorities, but not included in this order in 2013-14, includes £86.5 million paid directly to criminal justice authorities, £70.2 million for the council tax reduction scheme, which, as agreed with COSLA, will be distributed later once more up-to-date information is available, £70 million to fund the council tax freeze, and £37.6 million for the teachers' induction scheme. Although not part of today's order, the overall package for local authorities includes support for capital funding in 2013-14 of over £552 million, which includes local government's full share of the capital consequentials that I announced to Parliament on the 19th of December. Presiding Officer, I now turn to business rates, which are a key issue for Scotland's business community and an integral part of local government finance. In November, I announced that we would again match the poundage rate in England. I also announced that record numbers of small businesses across Scotland are benefiting from the Small Business Bonus Scheme. In 2006-07, just £24 million was awarded under the previous administration's relief scheme for small business. Under this administration, it is estimated that the Small Business Bonus Scheme will save Scottish business around £151 million in 2013-14, almost 7 times as much. Along with the reforms of empty property relief, combined with our Fresh Start initiative, which aims to encourage landlords to let out empty properties, as well as create new discounts for entrepreneurs across Scotland who take on these properties. These reliefs, which are the most generous in the United Kingdom, provide a real boost to businesses in Scotland. In summary, Presiding Officer, the total funding from the Scottish Government to local government next year will amount to almost £10.3 billion. In these very difficult economic times, we have worked constructively with our local government partners to agree an overall funding settlement and package of measures to help sustain and develop the services on which the people of Scotland depend wherever they live. With that in mind, Presiding Officer, I move that Parliament agrees to the Local Government Finance Scotland Order 2013.
Thank you. And I now call on Sarah Boyack. 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. These are indeed tough times for local government, and this order today shows that you can't trust the SNP to protect local services. As ever, the Cabinet Secretary is pretending that this is a good deal for local government and will protect local services. We all know that's a complete fiction. But this, in the Chamber today, is our chance to hold the SNP government to account and put on record the impact of the SNP's budget settlement on local services across the country. And that story needs to be told. This year, the Local Government Committee did not even take evidence for the Cabinet Secretary or the Minister for Local Government on these budget proposals. So no chance to scrutinise the implications of the budget cuts that we see in front of us today. And the challenges facing... No, we've got a short time here. The challenge facing local government... I might take an intervention later, but I'm 50-odd seconds into my speech. I don't think so. The challenges facing local government in Scotland are stark as funding is squeezed. This time last year, the SNP government passed the brunt of its cuts, 83% in total to local government, and that provides the backdrop to this year's budget. It is still a cut in real terms. It will put further pressure on hard-pressed local authorities, and we will see increasingly difficult decisions having to be made. Now, yesterday the SNP pushed through cuts to housing, further education and the Egypt. It wasn't a budget for jobs. There's the massive underspend on NPD schemes, and today there's a whopping £52 million chopped off capital spending for local government. Today's financial settlement will mean that local government again is forced into that financial straitjacket from this government, forced into reducing staff numbers and forced to reduce the services they provide. So make no mistake, the consequences will be felt by families and by local businesses across the country. This year's cut, yes I will on that issue.
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm grateful to Sarah Boyack for giving way. Yesterday, the Labour Party said that they had delivered a very focused input into the budget, which was to press us to change our position on college funding, housing and the Edinburgh to Glasgow Improvement Programme. There was no mention of local government. Does that not just make her speech utterly worthless today?
Sarah Boyack, and I can give some time back.
Thanks very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. Well, I think you'll know, if you listen to Ken McIntosh's speech, the impact of housing on local government is absolutely central at the moment. We know the social housing system is broken, it needs to be fixed, and that's why we put so much money into housing in our budget suggestions yesterday. That would impact materially on local government. And it's not about inventing lots of one-bedroom flats from tomorrow. It's about getting those local companies going and getting building and housing across this country. That would make a real difference to local government taxpayers. So this year we see a further 2.2% decrease in real terms. And that's after the money for police and fire has been removed from the budget line. And let's not forget that the Scottish Government are now trying to sneak through redundancies from police and fire boards before the national services are set up in a few weeks' time. This year continues the trend, with local government core funding falling as a share of the government budget. Yet every time I raise the issue of SNP cuts in here in this chamber, Local Government SNP Minister praises the generous settlement. Now, I want to say on record, I do think that the business rates scheme is a great idea. The business rates incentive scheme, it's a great idea. But what is the context? The toughest economic climate for decades, with shops disappearing daily, as already debated in the Chamber this afternoon. So local government needs to be funded effectively, and we know the die has been cast by yesterday's budget, but let's just put on the record, most of the key services we and our constituents rely on daily is provided by local government's budget choices, and those budget choices are hamstrung by the SNP government choices. Now, that is going to make tough choices across the country. We're beginning to see increased charging for care services. We're seeing newly qualified teachers finding it hard to get permanent posts, and we're seeing youth unemployment rocketing. And that's the context of our budget ambitions yesterday, to get people back into work and to get the shovels on the ground to those projects the SNP love to talk about. And alongside the loss of vital services, it is hard-working council staff who are bearing the brunt of these cuts. Since 2008, 25,000 local government jobs have gone, and that impacts on the capacity of councils to deliver services, impacts on the economy, it removes money from people's pockets that cannot be spent in local shops and businesses. And we know from Treasury figures that if you lose 51,000 public sector jobs, you'll lose 52 private sector jobs too. That's the squeeze that's been put on our local economies. And trumpeting the council tax freeze, as ministers tend to do, as years go on, that becomes more and more money going into the local government budget, but it's not enough to fill the gap. The true cost of the freeze is actually nearer £100 million a year, and that's the squeeze that local authorities are feeling day and daily. Now, the Cabinet Secretary talked about the fact that the Scottish Government had generously offered £23 million of the £40 million gap created by the UK Government's cut in council benefit tax when it was devolved to this Parliament. Yet in Wales, the Labour Welsh Assembly Government is providing the whole of that 10% gap this year. So our councils in Scotland are taking a particular hit of £17 million. Now, we will hear this afternoon that there are no negative consequences for hard-pressed council taxpayers, yet the local income tax solution that the SNP regularly suggest is hidden away in a filing cabinet somewhere in Victoria Quay, not to be allowed out until after the referendum. That's no solution for hard-pressed council taxpayers. The upshot is that for all the talk about partnership, local authorities do not have flexibility. They have to sign up, otherwise they have to face huge financial consequences, and worse, the constituents they represent have to face huge financial circumstances. In our election campaigns across the country last year, we highlighted on supporting people through these tough economic times, with investment in local jobs and training in our schools and support for carers. Our Labour Council colleagues are now doing their utter best to protect and improve services, working with local businesses and investing in training through their own schemes, even though their hands are tied behind their back by an increasingly centralising SNP government. And today, we get the welcome news that the Edinburgh trams will be included in the national concessionary scheme. Great news, we all thought, but then we looked at the detail. There's absolutely no commitment to any cash, leaving it up to the local authority to sort out the details itself. No surprise there then, passing the buck as usual. We want to tackle social injustice and inequalities in our communities. They have become acute in these rough times, and whether it's families trapped by debt, children being denied the best start in life, or people facing a future without decent care, local government has the potential to make the difference, to address these serious social inequalities. But it needs the resources to make the difference to people's lives that they want. Next year's budgets are going to be even tougher as the impact of Tory welfare reforms kick in. Today's order is only going to hamper economic recovery across Scotland, and it's going to damage the lives of vulnerable people who rely on our local government services. So today's settlement isn't good news, and SNP backbenchers know it.
Thank you. I now call in Margaret Mitchell. 5 minutes, but there is a little bit of time in hand for intervention.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The Scottish Conservatives welcome today's debate on the Local Government Finance Order for 2013-14, providing, as it does, a vital opportunity to discuss the current and future funding of Scotland's local authorities. Can I confirm at the outset that the Conservatives will be voting for the order this evening, but nonetheless, this debate gives us the opportunity to look at the background to the provision of the order. For the financial year 2013-14, the total Scottish Government settlement to local authorities will be almost £10.3 billion, which is substantially lower than the settlement for the 2013-14 that was originally set out in the 2012-13 draft budget and spending review. As the Cabinet Secretary confirmed, this reduction can be explained by the transfer of responsibility for policing and the fire service from local government to the new Scottish Police Authority and the new Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. The Local Government Finance Order follows the Budget Bill's Stage 3 proceedings yesterday and sets out the amount of revenue support grant payable to and the non-domestic income for local authorities in 2013-2014. Excluding the police and fire monies, which allows us to make like-for-like comparison, local authorities in Scotland over the next financial year will see a 1.8% decrease in real terms. The Scottish Conservatives have supported the council tax free, so the remainder of my opening and closing remarks will be concentrating on the revenue support grant and the non-domestic rates income. Starting with the non-domestic rates income, the order reveals a projected 7% increase in NDRI for 2013-14. Yet to date, no information has been forthcoming about the current collection rate for non-domestic rates income. Last year, the Local Government Committee recommended that these figures should be published regularly. Last year, the Finance Committee recommended that these figures should be published regularly. This year, again, both the Local Government Committee and the Finance Committee stated that these figures should be published regularly. Given the Cabinet Secretary receives collection rate figures quarterly, it's difficult to understand why, despite this, the recommendation of both these committees over a 2-year period, not to mention the best efforts of my colleague Gavin Brown to get him to release this information, the Cabinet Secretary has steadfastly refused to do so. As a result, it's just not possible to accurately assess if this 7% increase is even feasible. Furthermore, the Cabinet Secretary will be aware that the Scottish Conservatives have consistently argued that the decision that local authorities will retain only 50% of the income surplus collected under the business rate incentivisation scheme represents an opportunity lost. Instead, the similar scheme suggested by the Scottish Conservatives as far back as 2009, which would have seen local authorities retain 100% of the surplus, should have been introduced. And finally, to conclude my opening remarks, it should be stressed that businesses were desperately looking to the review of business rates due to be undertaken in 2015 and hoping this would result in the introduction of more realistic rates, reflecting the dire economic circumstances in which these businesses are currently operating. Instead, the Cabinet Secretary has delivered a cruel blow to businesses by announcing the revaluation of business rates will be delayed until 2017, a decision taken without having put in place the transitional relief scheme for businesses in Scotland, which is available to businesses in England. Presiding Officer, clearly this is going to be a difficult time for local authorities, and I look forward to hearing the views of other members during the course of the debate.
Thank you. This is a short debate, so speeches of 4 minutes, but I do have a bit of time in hand at the moment for interventions. I call John Wilson to be followed by John Pentland.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. In examining this debate in relation to the draft Local Government Finance Scotland Order for 2013, it is vital to recognise the contribution of the Cabinet Secretary in accelerating key priorities for the Scottish people in terms of obtaining significant financial outputs. It is worth reinforcing the Scottish Government deserves credit for creating a degree of security and sustainability for local government budgets. There is a strong commitment from the Scottish Government which should enhance local government spending priorities over the period from 2008 to 2012-13. Local government's budgets have increased by nearly 9%. Council tax rates have been frozen by all councils since 2007-8, and the Cabinet Secretary's commitment to continuing the support for the continued freeze is to be welcomed, and we wait on the decisions by local authorities to see whether or not they support the decision to continue with this freeze. The council tax freeze has saved average Band D households over £300 during the period from 2008-2012. Presiding Officer, revenue allocations of over £591 million for North Lanarkshire Council is not a sum to be dismissed lightly. It is also worth noting that when local authorities achieve efficiency savings in the past, the Scottish Government, since 2007, allowed these local authorities to retain these efficiency savings and use them to spend in their own priorities within their own areas, unlike the previous situation under the Labour-Liberal Executive, which clawed back efficiency savings, thus enabling authorities the opportunity to invest in their own strategic priorities and increase service provision as deemed necessary by the local authorities in their own areas. As highlighted earlier in the debate, there has been much discussion on the resource allocation, although it is worth stating that the local government expenditure will be squeezed, as Sarah Boyack has indicated, in cash terms by 0.2% in the 2013-14 budget, despite real terms cuts to the Scottish Government's own budget. Indeed, it could be argued that existing budgets already in place should be prioritised and take account of best practice already established by many local authorities throughout Scotland. Indeed, the arguments raised by local authorities in terms of its financial settlement is ironic, in that this year the figures are clearly difficult to calculate because of the direct comparisons with previous years, due to the fact that fire and police services budgets has been taken out of the local government settlement and will be directly paid to those agencies. And as I said, local authorities have to take account that these budgets have actually been withdrawn from their own budgets, and we look forward to how that works out in future years. There are a number of issues that are worth further examination, namely the issue of executive pay within local government is something of real concern to me. Scrutiny of the parameters set with regards to these pay levels looks increasingly self-serving. This is an area that needs to be addressed, especially in terms of setting the right tone in the current financial environment, at a time when many local authorities are still trying to deal with equal pay and single status claims that have been now outstanding since 1999. In terms of providing some context to the debate, this Government is taking account of the reality outside this chamber, and as the Cabinet Secretary indicated earlier, taking account of the social wage issues that face many people, and the insistence, or the encouragement, I should say, not the insistence, the encouragement of local authorities to introduce a living wage for all employees in local authorities has to be welcomed, and the continued freeze means that many people, low-paid workers in local authorities, will benefit from the decisions that have been made by the Cabinet Secretary. Can I say I support the order placed before the Parliament today, look forward to further discussion on these issues, and look forward to the opposition facing the reality of what we're facing in terms of budgets, and look forward to a positive contribution from them in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Call John Pentland to be followed by Mike Mackenzie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Once again, we are debating an underfunded settlement with the Scottish Government intent on pushing councils off the economic cliff. Over the next 2 weeks, councils will be meeting to agree deep cuts in their budgets. John Swinney, so quick yesterday to accuse others of hypocrisy, says he's proud of his budgets. Will he be proud of the cuts and damage done when councils are forced to consider increasing charges for their services, closing schools, cutting play parks and leisure facilities, reducing staff, cutting voluntary sector, closing or reducing opening hours for libraries, local offices and other facilities? Possibly the only thing that won't be cutting is the grass. Councils simply can't reduce spending without reducing employment, and the Minister should know that hits their local economy, further depressing council income. Local authorities also face further decline in their share of the Scottish Government expenditure. Despite now being less than 30% of the budget, local government gets 50% of this year's cuts, on top of the heavy cuts last year. Council tax, the main alternative source of income, is frozen. The Scottish Government talks of partnership with COSLA, but withholds £70 million until councils surrender to their diktat. Is that a partnership? I don't think so. Good partners don't use a big stick to get their own way. No, I'm not giving way to any interventions to people who applaud college cuts. We hear a lot about prevention from this government, but preventative services are being eroded by Mr Mackay and Mr Swinney's cuts. A stitch in time saves 9, but that's a bit difficult when the Scottish Government has cut the thread. The deeper the cuts, the harder the decisions become. Local authorities are beyond trimming excess. They are now cutting to the bone, and that means jobs. What price then the Scottish Government's no compulsory redundancy policy if they force others down that road? Doubtless Mr Swinney will claim it's not his fault. It is your fault, Mr Swinney. The public know it's your fault, for you have compounded the UK austerity with council cuts 2.5 times the cuts to the Scottish budget. Ministers say they would make different choices after separation, but why not make them now? Why make local government pay the price while they fail to stimulate growth with their grossly underperforming NPD model? Why hit local authorities with an additional £17 million funding gap on council tax benefit? Why are you not protecting local authorities from the impact of the Tory welfare reforms? Why spend so much time and resources on the dogma of separation? No doubt councils will be blamed, particularly the ones run by other parties, for any problems that arise from the Scottish Government cuts. So let's be honest, this isn't a settlement, this is an imposition. A new Cabinet Secretary and the Minister for Local Government, Mr Mackay, for being so weak, for not standing up for local authorities, will take the responsibility for the damage the Scottish Government is doing. And as for the Scottish Government's team backbenchers, chained to their leadership by a goal of independence, are they really happy with the cuts to local government? How far does the prospect of independence need to recede before we find out? Or will their seal-like applause just get louder to hide their growing unease?
Thank you. Can I remind members to speak through the chair, please? Mike Mackenzie, to be followed by Willie Rennie.
Presiding Officer, the Local Government Finance Settlement is once again, considering all of the circumstances, a generous one, maintaining local government's share of the Scottish Government's budget, which is higher now than it was in 2007-2008. And once again, council tax will be frozen, ensuring that hard-pressed households will be protected, supported by £70 million allocated on a needs basis. And this is economically important because our ailing economy lacks demand, and cutting household budgets will only depress demand further. It's the right thing to do economically, and it's the right thing to do morally. Teacher numbers will be maintained, supported by 39 million, and a range of measures are being introduced to ameliorate the worst effects of the UK Government's welfare reform, including 40 million to plug the gap left by the reductions to council tax benefit. Another measure to protect hard-pressed households. It's morally wrong that these cuts should fall hardest on those least able to bear them. But it's also a mistake to think that with limited resources, the Scottish Government can fully protect Scotland from these Westminster-imposed cuts. And councils too are receiving their share of extra capital, a further 46 million for shovel-ready projects, all of which will provide much-needed local economic stimulus, supporting jobs and demand. Of course, Presiding Officer, we've heard incredibly from the Tories that they're continuing to deny their austerity policies and argue that the UK Government is not making cuts. And they do this at the same time as they lobby on behalf of big business. I don't think the Scottish public are unlikely to be fooled by this. But Labour, just as absurdly, are continuing to call for more spending on virtually everything. And they seem equally, therefore, to be in denial of the Tory austerity policies. And they're failing today, as they failed to do since the first draft budget was introduced several months ago, to provide any real meaningful alternatives in terms of showing where they would get this extra money from to fund their very long and their very expensive wish list. Except we've heard this afternoon they want to increase council tax, adding hundreds of pounds to hard-pressed household bills. Theirs is a wonderfully complacent position, one where they seem to calmly accept the Tory cuts and somehow seem to believe that the Scottish Government can fully protect Scotland's people against these Tory ravages from their better together friends in the UK Government. Presiding Officer, with the limited powers at its disposal, the Scottish Government can never fully protect the Scottish people in these circumstances, not without the full range of powers that will come with independence. And given all these circumstances, and most notably the Westminster cut, the local government settlement is both fair and prudent.
Thank you. I now call Willie Rennie to be followed by Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. This is probably worth taking a moment just to consider today's order, because it's actually quite a significant order today. One of probably the most significant orders that we've had for local government for many years, because following the decision by the SNP government to centralise the police, which we opposed, the local government has seen £1.2 billion stripped out from their control. Now, this from a government that claims that it is in favour and has got a respect agenda, a trust agenda with local government, to strip out £1.2 billion from their control, I think shows a certain degree of disrespect, not respect. So I think it's worth just reflecting that this is probably one of the most significant orders for some time. And it's probably not just now, one of the most, actually biggest transfers of fiscal power from local government to central government, probably since around about the poll tax time. Yes.
Stuart Stevenson.
Would the member care to remind members present how much the value of the removal of ring fencing contributed to local government's control when it went from some 20% of expenditure down to some 4%?
Willie Rennie.
I think Stuart Stevenson's right. I mean, I think that was a good move. I think removing the ring fencing actually gave a certain degree of control for local government. But this has undermined all those efforts. By stripping away that power, by stripping away that finance, local government has seen their powers reduced significantly. But actually, I think it's also worth reflecting today that the commitment, the promise of the 85% floor has been broken. The funding floor was promised by John Swinney to be 85%, and he gives a long explanation, which I'm sure convinces some people. But I'm sure the SNP MSP who said at the time, said it was a great victory that the new funding floor will give the city a fairer deal for years to come. Years in plural, not 1 year, years in plural. We need an SNP government that follows through on that commitment. Because what we've seen is, on a Scottish-wide average, the spending per person is about £1,795. That's off the over £9 billion local government expenditure. In Aberdeen, with a budget of about £311 million and a population of around about 220,000, the figure is 1,412. And that accounts for £20 million. That's how much Aberdeen has been shortchanged. And I hope all the Aberdeen members who are sitting here today are able to explain to their constituents why that funding has not been followed through, why the funding floor has not been kept. Because this is going to have a significant impact over the years to come. And I hope when John Swinney winds up that he'll at least reflect on the fact that this commitment has not been maintained, and that in future settlements it will be maintained, because these kind of commitments, I think, are important. And in the few seconds I have left, I just want to reflect on what I think should be the direction of travel in Scottish politics in the years to come. I mean, many parties in this Parliament are in favour of more powers for this Parliament, some more than others, but I don't think it should necessarily just stop at Holyrood. We also need to consider the transfer of powers to local government. And that's why in our Home Rule proposals, Home Rule in a Federal UK, we've set out that council tax and business rate powers should be much more in the hands of local government, so that they too can have control over the purse strings. Because holding the purse strings gives you the fiscal responsibility, in the same way as I think holding the purse strings in this place, in partnership with the UK, is what we should be trying to achieve. So I hope that that's what members in this Parliament will agree in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Kevin Stewart, to be followed by Neil Bibby.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Some interesting contributions today. And first of all, I will turn to some of the comments that Ms Boyack made, because she said that local authorities can't trust the SNP, and she says local authorities do not have flexibilities. Well, I can tell Ms Boyack something as a former councillor. Certainly, councils didn't trust the Labour Liberal executive, who held most of the purse strings through ring fencing, and councils were forced to spend money on things which were not priorities in those particular areas. That was economic and financial madness, as far as I'm concerned, and I am glad that that has disappeared off the agenda. More flexibility now under this government since the Concordat was signed, and a respect agenda with local authorities. And many things have been said here today, but I will give you a quote from the finance spokesperson of COSLA, one councillor Kevin Keenan, a Labour councillor. On the 13th of December of 2012, he said, after the announcement, "There are no surprises in what the Minister told Parliament this afternoon, but it has to be accepted that there are challenges in there, challenges that will need to be faced by all 32 councils in Scotland." Not at the moment, thanks. A man who has a sensible comment there, recognising the fact that the government has challenges because of the cuts that we have had to bear from Westminster, and not the typical moans and groans that we often hear. And yesterday we heard from the Labour benches that the priorities were housing, were colleges, and were the Glasgow to Edinburgh rail link. Today it seems to be local government. And, you know, this is one of the things which really annoys me, because since the draft budget order, Labour have made announcements, spending commitments of £2.74 billion. And let's look at the realities of local government finance. And let's... No, you wouldn't take an intervention from me, Ms Boyack, and I may let you in later. Between 2007-8 and 2012-13, the Scottish Government's budget increased by 6.4%. Over the same period, local government's budget increased by 8.9%. That is showing respect to local government, an increased share of the Scottish Government budget over the piece. Very briefly.
Lewis MacDonald.
I'm grateful. I wonder what his response is to Mr Swinney's decision that Aberdeen City Council should no longer receive 85% of the Scottish average funding amount.
I was going to come to that, obviously, as an Aberdeen MSP. First of all, I would say that the 85% floor is over the spending period, as Mr Swinney has explained, and this was the first government to put that in place. And that is something that I am very proud of. However, at the same time, what I would say is that I still firmly believe that there should be a change to the funding formula. Now, that's not something that Mr Swinney can impose on local government with the respect agenda that we have. That is something that COSLA needs to deal with itself. Now, I fought for that within COSLA. I will continue to call for a change to that funding formula. Mr Rennie sits and smirks there, but the key thing in all of this is a fair funding formula. Now, if Mr Swinney were to impose anything on local government, there would be absolute uproar in this place. He has done what he promised to do in an SNP manifesto. I'm glad he did that. Do I think Aberdeen should get more? Yes. And I think that can be achieved through a change to the funding formula. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. I now call Neil Bibby to be followed by Stuart Stevenson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Yesterday's budget was bad news for my constituents. It was bad news because the Scottish Government turned their backs on students and pressed ahead with their £24 million cuts to colleges, a decision cheered and applauded by SNP backbenchers. And it was bad news because the Government's cut to the housing budget comes at a time when a shortage of affordable housing is one of the most urgent issues facing my constituents. Today, there is more bad news. We know the SNP government is passing the buck and passing on the vast majority of cuts to local authorities. As Sarah Boyack has said, 83% of the cuts were handed down to local government last year. The most painful decisions are being passed on, but the effect in our communities will be the same. Nowhere will the impact on local services be felt more than in my own area of Renfrewshire, an area that the local government minister will know well. Renfrewshire Council will set its budget next week. I know the new Labour administration will make the best use of its limited resources they have available. They've already shown a determination to do all they can to assist the most vulnerable people in our communities. The Council recently announced a number of measures to support local residents in dealing with the impact of welfare reform cuts. The Council is also investing heavily in tackling youth unemployment in Renfrewshire. But the fact is, this work is being completely undermined by a Scottish Government that is not only cutting the local government settlement, but also other financial support. Not only does the Renfrewshire Council need to plug a £16 million shortfall over the next 2 years, but £800,000 of youth employment money that was allocated by the Scottish Government to Renfrewshire last year is not being continued either. With around 13 people chasing every job vacancy in Renfrewshire, funding to tackle youth unemployment should be an absolute priority. We need to do all we can to help people back into work. But the Scottish Government's answer to this appears not to be giving additional money, but to pass on disproportionate cuts, which could result in Renfrewshire Council losing 250 staff in the coming year. The ministers have described this settlement as a good deal, but I think people in Renfrewshire will regard this as a bad deal. The Cabinet Secretary and the Minister for Local Government will know that Renfrewshire is the only mainland council in Scotland to have been allocated the minimum possible grant flow funding by the Scottish Government year on year since 2009. During this time, deprivation has increased significantly. The Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation showed that last year, 48 zones in the 15% most deprived areas of Scotland were found in Renfrewshire, compared to 43 in 2009 and 36 in 2006. There's also been an increase in terms of the 5% most deprived areas too, and Ferguson and Paisley was judged to be the most deprived area in the whole of Scotland last year. It's no coincidence that the level of deprivation in communities in Renfrewshire is increasing, at the same time as the Scottish Government's financial support is decreasing. In difficult times, support should be provided to those most in need. Why should an area like Renfrewshire, that has above average social and economic need, get below average funding? John Swinney and Derek Mackay can change funding settlements when they want to, They have made extra finances available for other areas, so why not give Renfrewshire a fair deal? Presiding Officer, in the last 2 days we've seen the Scottish Government make damaging decisions that will have a serious impact in many communities across Scotland. Yesterday's cuts are unwelcome, but I fear with the Government passing on the buck to local authorities again, even worse may yet to come. It's time that this Government stood up for local communities. It's time for the Local Government Minister to stand up for Renfrewshire and give Renfrewshire a fair deal.
Thank you very much. Now call on Stuart Stevenson, after which we move to closing speeches.
Thank you very much indeed, Presiding Officer. And let me start by congratulating the Cabinet Secretary and local councils on what has, over the years, been a very effective collaboration, despite the variety of political views and objectives that are captured by all the councils and by this chamber. In Scotland, we actually have the lowest number of elected politicians of any country in Europe, at 33.5. South of the border, it's about 42. You go up to Greece, it's 660. And I'm not advocating any change one way or the other. But I think what it does illustrate that we actually expect a great deal of our councils and of our councillors. And I think the overwhelming majority of councillors serve without thought of self-interest, work hours which would be hardly contemplatable if you were to look at the minimum wage. So I think we're very fortunate in all political parties in the broad sweep of the councillors we have. Willie Rennie, who is not with us at the moment, talked about Aberdeen. I noted that he did not choose to talk about Aberdeenshire. Aberdeenshire Council, which is Tory-led in partnership with the Lib Dems and an assorted group, well, the word group is hardly appropriate, of independents, ferrets in a sack comes more to it. Massive underspends in Aberdeenshire, tens of millions in consecutive years, undermining fatally any arguments for increases in resources, but more fundamentally, because of that underspend by Liberals and Tories in administration, cutting services unnecessarily in relation to the funding that they have. In particular, I think the removal of wardens from many of our sheltered housings are particularly resented by my constituents. There are individual councillors who do not rise to the individual challenge, and I'm going to take the opportunity of naming one in my constituency because of his running failure to earn his keep, and that is Councillor Alan Buchan, now a vice-convener in the administration, who, in the most important economic environment that we have, the Energetica corridor, cannot even bring it to his heart when he's leading a delegation to meet the people in the Energetica corridor to stay with the pack and stay with it. And I think it's time that that councillor in particular looked at his own performance, and the council leadership looked at that too. Now, there are some interesting things that have happened. I think we've seen an agreement to maintain teacher numbers in line with pupil numbers in councils. That's entirely welcome. Lewis MacDonald has, as he has in the past, made reference to funding for different councils. I'm slightly surprised that we haven't had a reminder, so let me make it, that of course Labour in essence control COSLA. They can change the formula. I encourage them to look at doing so. I just close, Presiding Officer, by looking at perhaps one thing from the numbers in the letter that the Cabinet Secretary has produced, and that is to look at PFI and loan charges, where for Glasgow City, long run by the Labour Party, they account for nearly 10% of the updated service provision, quite out of line with any other mainland council. The island councils in a different position, different circumstances. So I think, particularly for the Labour Party, they need to look a little closer to home for effective administration Presiding Officer, I joined the committee in September 2012 that's responsible for local authority. Very much enjoy being there, and I expect that we will see more support for councils. That committee will work on behalf of councils with the government, as we always do.
Many thanks. And we now move to closing speeches, but before we do, I would remind all members who have taken part in the debate that should be in the chamber for the start of the closing speeches. Margaret Mitchell, 4 minutes, please.
Thank you. Deputy Presiding Officer, there's been a number of valid points made during the debate from all sides of the chamber. What is not in doubt is that the order provisions confirm budget reductions to local authorities for the next financial year, and consequently some tough decisions will have to be made by Scotland's councils. In my opening remarks, I concentrated on the non-domestic rate income provisions in the order. And following on from this, I would be grateful if the Cabinet Secretary or the Minister for Local Government would confirm the following in their closing comments. Firstly, how much has been collected under the business rate incentivisation scheme so far? Secondly, what is the Scottish Government's prediction for the year's total? Thirdly, how many of Scotland's 32 local authorities will receive money back? And finally, how much will they actually receive? Turning now to the revenue support grant. Whilst it is to be welcomed that ring-fenced grants have more than halved since 2006-07, nonetheless concern has been voiced in this chamber today and elsewhere about the ability of local government to act independently and to respond to the local needs, when, at the same time, councils are becoming more heavily dependent on central funding sources. This concern was neatly summed up by the respected economist and advisor to the Finance Committee, Professor David Bell, when he stated that local government is increasingly dependent on funding from the Scottish Government and therefore potentially less able to take an independent stance on policy. In view of this, again, I would be interested to hear the Cabinet Secretary's comments. Yes, happy to do so.
I'm very grateful. I'm just wondering how far back I have to remember to the days when large, it seemed, significant parts of the council budget were ring-fenced and separately accounted for at great expense.
I think I covered that. Of course, that is to be welcomed, but we are in a situation now where increasingly, as Professor Bell highlighted, local government is more dependent on central funding and not able to make the choices that it would ideally want to do. Turning now to the Town Centre Regeneration Fund, which the Scottish Conservatives have consistently argued for, and the creation of which we made a condition of supporting the minority SNP government's budget in 2009. We, of course, welcome the announcement of the £2 million town centre regenerations, but have to say, spread as it is over 32 local authorities, it's unlikely to make any significant impact on our town centres, which are reeling from the prospect of the empty property tax and the reality of the retail levy. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, local authorities knew that the financial settlement for 2013-14 would be challenging, and today's debate has confirmed that view. However, it is to be hoped that Scotland's councils can turn these challenges into opportunities to look at better ways to deliver service in the wider debate about public sector reform.
Many thanks. I now call on James Kelly, 6 minutes or thereby, please.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. I welcome the opportunity to take part in this afternoon's debate and to scrutinise the record of the SNP Scottish Government on local government. We have heard throughout this debate from the slavishly loyal SNP backbenchers about what an outstanding settlement this is for local councils. I think what we need to do is follow the money. Let's look at the figures in terms of the settlement, the figures provided by SPICE. And they tell us, when you strip away all the transfers and the police and fire money, that local councils have £216 million less in real terms than they did last year. And despite the fact that local government accounts for around a third of the Scottish Government budget, the level of the cuts being apportioned to local councils is over the 50% mark. So local councils are being penalised by this SNP government. So let's not hear any more about what an outstanding settlement it is and what a great relationship the SNP government have with local councils.
John Swinney.
I'm grateful to Mr Kelly for giving way. I wonder if he could help us by telling us by how much money the local government settlement should be increased.
James Kelly.
The point I'm making, Mr Swinney, is that in terms of the budget, that you are laying out, more than half of the cuts have been made against local government, passed on from the UK government. The local government budget represents only a third of the Scottish Government share, so it's a matter of record that the local government section of the budget has been more penalised than other areas of the budget. And I do want to make some progress. Stuart Stevenson quite rightly paid tribute to the work of local councillors. But let's look at the practical effect that this settlement has had and the difficult decisions that local councillors are going to have to make. They face the prospect of having to close or curtail the activities of sports facilities, just at a time when we're in the run-in to the Commonwealth Games and we're trying to encourage sports participation. At a time also when the elderly, just let me make these points, at a time when the elderly population is rising, we see compromises on the care packages, which puts real pressure not only on pensioners but also in local councils. And it is a matter of fact that there are some schools that can't afford to print out the homework for school pupils, and they're passed home for those pupils to get the homework printed at home, when some families in the very poor areas that Neil Bibby was talking about, no thank you, can't even afford computer printers. I'll give way to Stuart Stevenson.
Stuart Stevenson. I thank the member for giving way. I wonder if he could perhaps inform me, now that recently the Labour members in Aberdeenshire Council have joined the administration, whether the policy of significant underspend will be sustained now that Labour is part of that administration. And he should bear in mind he will be held to account for these answers at a later date.
James Kelly.
In terms of Aberdeen Council, I'm proud of the record of that council in delivering a living wage. And even that policy in different councils across the country is going to be compromised by the settlement that we're seeing today from the SNP government. I think it's a political choice that the SNP government have made here. They've passed the buck on, and therefore they're trying to pass the blame to local government. Sorry, I do need to make some progress. As Sarah Boyack rightly pointed out, 25,000 jobs lost since 2008, and that's the impact that that's going to have on local economies. Neil Bibby was right to mention the report issued before Christmas highlighting areas of deprivation: Fergusley Park in Paisley, Whitlaburn in South Lanarkshire, Bruce Hill in Dumbarton. What response is this settlement giving to the challenges of deprivation in these areas? What do we see from the government? We see, in terms of the Constitution, 32 work streams set up to look at the independence issue. Instead of having 32 work streams looking at that issue, take the people from those work streams and set them to work on how we can challenge deprivation in our local communities and help the very people that Neil Bibby was speaking about. The fact of the matter is that this government are locked, as Mike McKenzie spoke about, they're locked in the independence bubble, announcing Independence Day when they can't even give us a date for the referendum. Cheering on the council cuts. In summing up, Deputy Presiding Officer, it's time that the likes of Mr Mackay get out of his ministerial office, listen to people on the ground and produce a settlement which is a fair settlement and will give local councils a chance to face up to the real challenges that they find in their communities.
Thank you very much. I now call on Minister Derek Mackay to wind up the debate. Minister, you have 8 minutes or thereby. Please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I do note, when directly asked, of course, of the Labour Party, how much additional revenue or capital would you give to local government? It was deafening, the silence from the Labour Party, and absolute figures or an alternative budget. But you see, I was listening very closely to the budget debate yesterday from Ken McIntosh when he said he only had 3 simple requests for extra resources, and they were for colleges, they were for housing, and they were for rail. Not a penny for local government in capital spend, not a penny for local government in revenue spend. So it depends, of course.
Sarah Byatt.
I think we'd actually be constructing those houses. It would be local authorities and housing associations. It's perfectly obvious.
Derek Mackay.
Well, you see, in addition to the Barnett consequentials, which the share will go to local government, the 28% share will go to local government. In addition to that, from the Scottish Government, will be the housing resource that Mr Swinney has committed this Government and this Parliament to. And actually, the decisions and the views that the Labour Party say they're taking would actually take resources away from local government, away from schools, away from roads and away from other priorities. You see, you find out what Labour Party priorities are depending on the debate in which you are in attendance. Don't expect any consistency from the Labour Party on these matters. I want to return to the very appropriate questions that Margaret Mitchell asked, and that was around the figures on business rates. We have to look at the business rates incentivisation scheme at the end-year process, because then we have the actual out-term figures. So I can't say at this stage how much will be realised through that and how much will be returned through the 50% mechanism to local government, because targets are set for the end of the year. But of course we will return to that before the... Of course.
Is it not the case that the Cabinet Secretary is regularly updated on these figures throughout the year?
Minister Derek Mackay.
The member asked about the business rates incentivisation scheme and how many councils would benefit from that. My answer is we won't know until the end-year process, when we have the out-term figures on business rates and the targets that have been reached. But what local government does have certainty over, of course, is that the Scottish Government guarantees that resource to local government. That non-domestic rates income, Labour conveniently leave out the local government settlement figures, and that's how they arrive at this 50%, 85%, 83%. You accuse SNP backbenchers of being loyal. At least they can stick to the same line in a debate, rather than 4 different figures on accusing this government of reducing the share of resource to local government, which incidentally has increased under this SNP government and was decreasing under the Labour Liberal executive when in power. And an interesting statistic for some folk who would like to indulge in some doom-mongering: actually, when the Scottish Government budget had increased over the period, an increase of 6.4%, over that very same period, the contribution, the local government budget, increased by 8.9%, higher than the increase in the Scottish Government budget. Now, we recognise that times are indeed tough. I want to turn to Willie Rennie's remarks. I think the Cabinet Secretary has again clarified how the figures were included and how Aberdeen and Edinburgh, as a consequence of the 85% floor, was contributed to the funding formula at the time. The 85% commitment was indeed delivered. So Mr Rennie misunderstands that mechanism. and also misunderstands the transfer to local government as well as it relates to police and fire, because actually the transfer from Scottish Government to local authorities for the purposes of police and fire was largely ring-fenced to be passed on to the police authorities at the time. So by transferring the money, incidentally on an agreed basis with local government, agreed in partnership with local government, along the spirit of the Concordat and our partnership approach, they have agreed with the transfer figures largely to the new single authorities. But Mr Rennie, like Mr Kelly, is obsessed with the Constitution rather than the bread and butter issues that we face day and daily. And Mr Pentland pleads with us to mitigate the impact of Westminster decisions. Although we've done that in terms of council tax benefit in other areas, wouldn't it be better to cut the Tory-led administration in Westminster out of the equation so that we can make decisions for ourselves in this Parliament with Scotland's own resources? The figures, if I can make some more progress, the figures that were given by the Labour Party are of course inaccurate because they ignore the non-domestic rates income, and it will be for councils to make choices. And I would turn to his colleague, Mr Bibby. We're no longer sparring in the council chamber, we're in Scotland's national parliament. But I am left wondering why it is you don't support the floor mechanism, which has given the very kind of safety net and recognition of deprivation that we would expect to care for the most vulnerable in our community. The floor is not a disadvantage, it compensates the less well-off areas and gives additional resources to local authorities in the position such as Renfrewshire. I'd like to make more progress because I would want to probe the then budget choice for Renfrewshire, who didn't invest in some of the priorities that Mr Bibby suggested, but managed to find resources for new councillors' accommodation in Renfrewshire Council, big new flat-screen TVs in the council chambers and more senior Labour councillors. How is that the priorities of the people of Renfrewshire? I think a number of contributions were made around what these orders actually achieve today in terms of new resources for local government on areas where we have reached agreement, commitments around free personal care, family support, teacher induction and the council tax freeze, of course.
Hanzala Malik.
Thank you for the intervention. You make a very interesting point. I just wondered, don't you have a TV in your office?
Mr Mackay.
I believe there was one which dates back from the Scottish... Well, there we are, the Scottish Government's exposed now, and that television that was purchased from parliamentary authorities some time ago does feature in my office. Mr Malik, thanks very much for that intervention. I'm not quite sure why it is that the Labour Party would rather leave it to Westminster to determine our resources, when what this settlement for local government does is achieve £9.7 billion revenue support for local government, £552 million capital for local government, and around capital to help stimulate the economy. The deal that will be agreed with local government will encourage the transfer to capital, the new resources as a consequence, the Barnett consequentials, to invest in new capital projects which will be achieved timorously. That feels like the right kind of decisions to stimulate economic recovery at this time. So the share to local government has increased under the SNP and will still be higher than that which we inherited from the previous Labour Liberal executive when they were in power. We're guaranteeing the non-domestic rates income for local government, and in Scotland we have the most generous package of rates relief in the United Kingdom. Rates relief amounting to over £500 million in Scotland, including the small business bonus, as well as the new town centre fund that the Conservatives happened to vote against yesterday at the budget process. This gives certainty, no surprises, investment in Scotland's priority, the continuation of the council tax freeze, which, if I remember correctly, at the Scottish Parliament elections was also a manifesto commitment of the Labour Party, since abandoned, of course, by their leader. And then Sarah Boyack asks us, what are we doing for the hard-pressed council taxpayers of Scotland? We, in partnership with local government, are freezing the council tax for the hard-pressed council taxpayers of Scotland, a shared manifesto commitment, but a commitment that we are able to abide by, which the Labour Party is disowning. And a number of SNP members have quite rightly identified the de-ring-fencing of large sums of money from the Scottish Government to local government. That is the right approach. Absolutely, that is the right approach. And will there any answers?
Just as we,
thank you, Presiding Officer. Just as we require, we want to seek the powers to transfer from London to Scotland. Yes, there is the potential for more to transfer to a more local level as well. But I'll finish on this challenge to the Labour Party particularly. If you want to revisit the distribution mechanism and how local government finances are distributed across Scotland, the Cabinet Secretary and I are more than happy to work with COSLA in partnership to review that distribution, because what that will do will show the hypocrisy of the Labour Party and others and how local government distribution is actually spread.
Thank you very much. And that concludes the debate on the draft Local Government Finance Scotland Order 2013, and it is now time to move on to the next item of business, which is a debate on motion number 5586 in the name of Fergus Ewing on the Debt Arrangement Scheme. I'd invite members who wish to speak in the debate to press the Request to Speak buttons now or as soon as possible, and if you're ready, Minister, I'll call on you to speak to and move the motion. Fergus Ewing, 10 minutes, please, or thereby.
Presiding Officer, I'm delighted to have secured this debate today on a subject that touches many people across Scotland. That subject is debt. The number of members here indicates the importance of this debate and the shared concern across all parties. I'm sure that all members would wish to join with me in welcoming the publication in today's Daily Record, a copy of which, as it happens, I have with me here, of a practical supplement to help families. This is it here, a 16-page practical supplement, Presiding Officer, to help families take control of their debt. And as it happens, I've read it, and it sets out excellent advice, which I'd commend to all members and to everyone with an interest in this topic. And I congratulate the Daily Record on this publication, which will be of great help. A helpline has been set up offering people a free financial health check from an independent approved money advisor. Taking this step will help people take responsibility for their finances and encourage good money management. So, well done to the Daily Record. The Daily Record publication is helpful in highlighting to the people of Scotland that turning to high-interest payday lenders is seldom the answer. And the number of people, Presiding Officer, taking out payday loans is increasing, sadly, all the time. A report commissioned by Consumer Focus indicates that no less than 1.2 million adults in the UK took out an estimated £4.1 million payday loans in 2009 to a value of £1,200 million. The report goes on to suggest that these figures could continue to rise steeply, potentially by 40 to 45%, or up to 500,000 additional UK payday borrowers. Members across the Chamber will have heard many of the sad tales that some of these borrowers have to tell, how they find themselves trapped in a cycle of debt which they're unable to pay back, and when their payday loan is effectively rolled over or flipped is the term, meaning that a new loan is taken out and even more interest is charged. A loan, one example I heard of, a loan of £400 after 6 months cost £800 to repay, and I do not think that that is unrepresentative. So interest rates and control over payday lending does, of course, rest with the UK Government. As a Parliament, we simply lack the power we would like to possess, but we lack the power to curb the high interest rates which the Labour amendment invokes us or exhorts us so to do. We do not have the power to do what the Labour amendment, Presiding Officer, asks us to do, though we would like to have those powers. But lack of power over these issues will not stop this Government taking action where we do have powers. We will ensure that in relation to enforcement of debt, a devolved matter, individuals are not placed in an adverse position within our statutory debt management scheme, the Debt Administration Scheme, known as DAS. And I will say more shortly about our plans for changes to DAS, which we hope to introduce before the summer recess, aimed at supporting those people affected by continued interest charges, including high-interest lending. The changes we will make will help alleviate the burden on individuals in Scotland, but that is only part of the answer. The full solution can only be found if the UK Government is willing to take action to address extortionate interest rates applied by payday lenders. I welcome the modest steps taken at a UK level, principally the introduction of codes of practice, and I recognise that that action has been welcome. But we do believe that it simply does not go far enough. Yes,
Ken McIntosh.
Ken McIntosh.
Minister, for taking an intervention, and I think the debate generally will be consensual today. The Labour Party certainly do wish the UK Government to take action, but I'm sorry, I don't believe there's anything in our amendment that specifically causing them to do so. It specifically limits itself to the actions that the Scottish Government can and should be taking.
Well, I'll revert to that point perhaps in closing after I've heard what Labour have to say. I am interested in what they have to say, and I do generally want a consensual debate. And I think that this will be. But let us be in no doubt, we want the powers in this Parliament. We don't have them at the moment. That is a fact. If we did, we would be doing far more than we are doing today, and that which I will announce today. And let's look at other countries and what they're doing. In Finland, the government have brought forward a bill to cap charges and costs resulting from payday loans at 50 percentage points above the European Central Bank reference rate. That ensures a cap of 51% for 2013. In France, there is a tightly specified ceiling on interest rates, which I'm advised is set at 33% above the average Banque de France quarterly rate. Now, these changes have been made in these countries to improve consumers' ability to assess the total cost of their loans and to prevent predatory lending to households in financial difficulty. They are laudable aims and one which the Scottish Government supports. The UK Government, however, has declined to take similar steps, leaving us once again with the sense that the UK is not acting, as we see it, in the best interests of the people of Scotland. Presiding Officer, if it's good enough for France, if it's good enough for Finland, why not Scotland? And indeed, why not the whole of the people in the UK? In the Scottish Government, we do not want to see people in debt, no matter which side of the border they are on, being unable to access fair remedies. But in an independent Scotland, we would have an opportunity to consider and learn lessons from other countries in the world and choose our own solution on these matters. In 2014, the UK Government will transfer the regulation of consumer credit from the OFT to the Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA. It is to be hoped, Presiding Officer, and I'm positive about these things, and I want to work with the UK Government on these matters, which is why we'll be supporting the Conservative amendment tonight, which reasonably invokes us to do so. Perfectly correct, we will support that. And therefore, in that spirit, I hope the FCA will see what we have done already, and that some payday loan lenders are extending credit to borrowers who have no means to pay back what they owe, and we will take firm action. We hope that the FCA, rather, will take firm action to regulate this sector. But the Scottish Government will not wait to do what we can with the powers we have. Later this year, we will bring forward a bankruptcy reform bill, which will deliver on our proposal for a financial health service, a financial NHS. This will ensure that Scotland leads the way in the development of modern insolvency practice, which responds effectively to meet the rights and needs of debtors and creditors. But the hardships related to payday loans require us to act faster. People who may be legitimately seeking to improve their financial well-being by taking out a payday loan sometimes find that instead of curing the problem, they have contracted something which can make it much, much worse. Some individuals who have seen payday loans flipped and rolled over can be charged interest which accrues at punitive rates of up to 4,000% APR. Presiding Officer, this spring, though our proposed change is not directed solely at payday loans, the Scottish Government will make changes to DAS, to the Debt Arrangement Scheme. These changes will freeze interest and charges earlier in the process. They will do so from the date at which a debtor's application is submitted to creditors. In practice, this could protect the debtor from as much as 2 or 3 additional interest charges. Now, that may not sound much, but it's 2 or 3 months when the debtor will be worried sick about the additional interest that's mounting, £400 to £800, remember, over 6 months. This, I hope, therefore, will be a measure that all parties will support. It has to go through the parliamentary process, Presiding Officer, and therefore we expect that it should be able to come into force with support from other parties and subject to scrutiny of Parliament before the summer recess. I certainly take the intervention.
Thank you, President Officer. And can I thoroughly welcome what the Minister is doing, because I do think it will help in quite a significant way for the 3,000 odd people that are on debt arrangement schemes. I wonder whether he recognises that in order to get on a DAS, you have to have access to a DAS-approved money advisor. There are only 90 across the whole of Scotland, and if you live in Angus, if you live in Orkney, Renfrewshire, Scottish Borders, Shetland or West Lothian, there are no debt arrangement scheme approved advisors. Will the Government seek to address that point?
Minister.
Well, the member raises a very important point, and one which we recognise is one that's constantly under review, because we do need to make sure that there is access across Scotland to appropriate advice. And therefore she has raised an important point, and I will come back to her after this debate specifically on the specific areas she has mentioned, because we recognise that these are serious points, and indeed we have addressed and improved access, but there's always more we need to do. Other changes to the scheme include a review process for decisions by the DAS administrator, the introduction of composition where the debt payment programme has been paid over 12 years or more and 70% of the debts have been paid, and we will also make changes to the rules on payment holidays to make it more flexible. If people lose their job and they can't pay what they've agreed to repay, there needs to be flexibility. That is the principle, Presiding Officer. In conclusion, the DAS is a uniquely Scottish product. It's risen from 128 DAS cases in 05-06 to 3,319 in 11-12, and this year 3,900, and there's 2 months to go. So it's popular, it's rising, it's useful. I hope the changes I've set out today will secure cross-party support and, most important, provide further help for those who most need it, who are suffering from the misery and sometimes the despair of being in serious debt in our country.
Thank you very much. Did you move your motion? Did you move your motion?
I move the motion.
Thank you very much. Now Colin Ken McIntosh to speak to and move Amendment 5586.1. Mr McIntosh, you have 7 minutes, please, or thereby.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And this week's Daily Record has indeed served us well in revealing the deeply troubling extent of Scotland's debt problems. As part of an investigation alongside the Citizens Advice Bureau, they've uncovered that we are drowning in debt, to such an extent that nearly 400 Scots a day are seeking help to deal with their debt worries. Now, many of these, the Record quoted this week and who are contacting the CAB, say that they have gone without food or fuel because of the severity of their debts. This is the Scotland in which we live, a Scotland of debt spiralling out of control and of the working poor choosing between paying off what they owe and putting food on the table. Presiding Officer, last week I thought we had a very useful and constructive debate on the cost of living and on payday loans, where there was almost universal acknowledgement of the shameful practices being used to exploit those in debt and who have run out of other options. The Minister and other members quite rightly highlighted in that debate the cycle of debt which individuals become trapped in when they are unable to pay back the loans they have accrued, often taking out one loan to pay off another. And the scale of the debt problem in Scotland is quite staggering. There were 3,855 personal insolvencies in the third quarter of 2012. During the same period, there were just over 1,000 new applications approved for the debt arrangement scheme, an increase of 21.5% on the same quarter in the previous year. Now, I can just about recall the debate in 2002, where my colleague Richard Simpson and the then Deputy First Minister Jim Wallace introduced the bill to Parliament which created the debt arrangement scheme, and which I hate to remind the Minister the SNP abstained on. But then, as now, there was a recognition that debt management is the important factor in dealing with debt, rather than simply focusing on enforcement. And as the Minister notes in his foreword to the DAS review, the scheme is now entering its 9th year as the only statutory debt management tool in the UK. As with any scheme, it is right that it is being reviewed. Now, we support many of the proposals being put forward by the Government. The extension of the scheme to couples was a welcome step forward, as were the proposals to increase the length of the payment holiday. Today's proposal that there is a moratorium on interest payments, in other words, that interest and debt is frozen from the moment someone applies for a debt arrangement scheme, not just when it is approved, is similarly welcomed. And this will hopefully actually prevent the DAS scheme inadvertently driving some people into the arms of payday lenders. In fact, given that the suggestion, I believe, came initially last year from Mike Daly at the Govan Law Centre and was wholeheartedly endorsed by my colleague Kezia Dugdale at the time, I am delighted indeed that the Minister was listening and has taken this idea forward. There are other proposals too which have come out of last year's debt arrangement scheme review, but there is not a huge amount of detail available until we have sight of the Government's proposed bankruptcy bill. I understand it may take forward other issues, such as a single Scottish-specific common financial tool, and may propose increasing the minimum debt level to £3,000 for most individuals. We look forward to seeing the detail of these in due course. Now, the Minister, in his opening remarks, talked about what he can't do, but as my colleague Kezia Dugdale noted last week, there is certainly much more the Government can do here and now, and I hope that the Government will today support our amendment, which seeks to set out a number of the areas which could curb high-interest, short-term lending. One such area is to use the social advertising spend that the Government has, almost £1 million of it last year, to highlight the options open to people teetering on the edge of the debt cliff. Only £23,000 of it was used to highlight debt issues in 2011-12, and meanwhile Wonga, undoubtedly one of the most cynical and predatory of all the payday loan companies, has grown its advertising budget from approximately £22,000 in 2009 to £16 million in 2011. And I welcome a clarification of the Minister where he stands. Clearly, he was showing us a copy of the Daily Record where the Government has advertised, but in his replies to my colleague Kezia Dugdale, he seemed to suggest that there are barriers to action in this area. A guarantee loan fund for credit unions would offer them the security and the sustainability to expand into new communities. They would be able to carry out far more outreach work to ensure people are as aware of the availability of credit unions as they are currently of payday loan companies. Now, I recognise that we have to find a way to finance such a loan fund, but we could start by the Government simply underwriting a relatively small amount, allowing credit unions to serve a section of the population that is not just currently underserved, but vulnerable to exploitation. Alternatively, if this assistance or guarantee took the form of a loan itself and therefore could be repaid, that would be another good and affordable starting point. I'm sure I don't have to point out that this sort of measure, stopping people falling into greater debt, bankruptcy, homelessness or family breakup, is very much in keeping with the preventative spend agenda of the Christie Commission and others. It would actually stop people taking out debt arrangement schemes in the first place by not falling into debt. Now, we need to do more to point people in the direction of family and financial advice. On that note, I am still a little baffled as to why it took the Government more than a year to pass on the debt advice money made available across the rest of the UK to the Citizens Advice Bureau, but not until recently to here in Scotland. There are other practical steps we could take, some of which were outlined in the debate last week. In fact, some were outlined by SNP backbenchers. We could stop these payday loan shops even opening up, and some local authorities are doing exactly that. We could clamp down on the mis-selling of payday loans using local standards, trading standards teams. We could stop these companies from advertising loans on publicly controlled computers or websites. We could emulate the sort of action taken against the sale of tobacco and cigarettes and begin to treat the sale of high street interest loans in a similar manner. Having said how pleased I was... Yes,
Minister Ferguson.
I think we broadly want to pursue the same objective, so the approach is positive, although I'm delighted that the taxpayer paid zero for the Daily Record's excellent work today, because we're working in partnership with them, so that's a good form of advertising from the point of view of the Scottish taxpayer. But can I ask Mr McIntosh if you can just clarify one thing, because during the budget process, my information is that the proposal which is set out of a guaranteed loan fund was not put at any point. Can he say what his proposal is? How much money is he arguing that the Scottish Government should set aside, and from which budget would it come, since it wasn't, so far as I'm aware, a proposal about which we heard at any part of the budget process which was completed yesterday?
Mr McIntosh.
I'm not sure the Minister's question reveals a very consensual way of working. This is not a specific budget ask. What we are suggesting is that we are willing to sit down with the Minister and with representatives of Money Advice Bureau across the country, Citizens Advice or Govan Law Centre and others, and particularly with the credit unions, to work out how we could fund such a scheme. And we would work with the Minister in a consensual manner. And it doesn't have to be that affordable. I've submitted two suggestions, one which is underwriting and the other which would be a loan. So the point I'm trying to make is they are extremely affordable, and it's up to the Minister, and we will give the Minister support if he was willing to explore this area. Now, having said that, I was pleased to hear that the Minister followed the advice of the Government Law Centre earlier in making today's announcement. He could do so again, because the Centre has made further suggestions as part of a fast-track debt arrangement scheme, which would further clip the wings of the payday loan companies. Treating interest and capital separately, for example, would be worth exploring. At the moment, for the purposes of establishing a debt payment plan, those with payday loan debt have all the penalty clauses and the rolled over interest payments accumulated into one, unlike, for example, credit union debt, where it is restricted to the original capital and a relatively small interest charge. There are still access problems, which my colleague Kezia Dugdale alluded to, and I welcome the Minister's comment that he will take action to follow that up. So, in conclusion, Presiding Officer, we will be supporting the Government's motion today, and I hope the Minister too will support our amendment and our practical measures, our affordable measures, Minister, to alleviate the scourge of short-term high-interest lending.
You are moving your amendment?
I move the amendment tonight.
Many thanks. Now call on Alec Johnson to speak to and move Amendment 5586.2. Mr Johnson, 5 minutes or thereby.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. It's my pleasure to rise to support the motion in the name of Fergus Ewan and to propose the amendment to it in my name. The issue of availability of credit is something which has been changing in society over many years, and domestic use of credit is something which is far more common than once it was. As the availability of credit moved down the market, more and more people became used to the idea that they would borrow to invest in their own home or for things to put in it. And as a result, the amount of domestic borrowing has been increasing regularly. However, that situation got much worse with the financial crisis which we found ourselves in recent years, and that left more people in Scotland having to come to terms with dealing with debt. It's a serious problem that's left many households in a position of making tough decisions in order to keep up with repayments. The debt arrangement scheme can be a great tool to help individuals struggling with debt to recognise that the money they owe and allow them the time to pay it off. It's undoubtedly a great scheme, and it has already helped many people deal with their debt problems. The proposals which the Scottish Government have brought forward to reform the debt arrangement scheme to allow the freezing of interest charges from an earlier date and the existing amount of debt to be frozen is also extremely valuable. However, as we look at the problems associated with payday loans in particular, I have to say it is quite extraordinary that we are in a position where there are commercial loan companies lending money at astronomical rates, which themselves are a major contributing factor to causing non-repayment and consequently the circumstances which the debt arrangement scheme has been brought forward to deal with. However, it has to be said that as we look at alternatives, it would be valuable if we could find ways to limit that interest, but there are alternatives to that approach which should be running parallel. The opportunity to ensure that the mainstream financial institutions are in a position to provide loans that have a similar character at more effective or more appropriate interest rates is one which we should encourage consideration of. I'm also ill-informed but taken by the idea that there is an increased role for credit unions, and I find myself, surprisingly perhaps, supporting what the Labour Party has to say in empowering credit unions in the long term so that they can take a greater role. The amendment which I've already proposed is designed to deal with one particular problem that has come to the attention of someone in my office who's been doing research in advance of this debate. It appears that there has been a problem with cross-border recognition of the debt arrangement scheme. Since a lot of creditors are based south of the border and don't have much knowledge of the scheme, this can result in debtors and money advisors simply not knowing how the scheme operates or even of its availability. Since AIB took over the administration of the debt arrangement scheme last year, this has reduced, but apparently it still happens. Therefore, I think it's important that Scotland's two governments work together to ensure that knowledge of the scheme is more widely available and that we don't have problems with understanding. There is one other problem which has come to light, and again this runs very close to something that the Labour Party have been talking about, and that is the role of voluntary organisations which are effectively working to administer the debt arrangement scheme free of charge. The Citizens' Advice Bureaus are an example of that. One adviser which I got information from told me that there is a near doubling of the number of cases that she has had to deal with. And while the Government provides £167,000 of funding to fund second-tier training in the debt sector, this doesn't cover the ongoing work in places such as the Citizens' Advice Bureau. So, while I am very reluctant to come forward and demand huge additional expenditure of the Government, it is nevertheless the case that in this area a relatively small amount of money could go a very long way. As a result of this, I would be delighted if we could see the Government simply ensure that the widely held and widely supported positive views that have been expressed in this debate result in an ongoing process which makes the debt arrangement scheme an ever more effective way to deal with an ever more dangerous problem.
Many thanks. We now move to open debate, and I call on Mike Mackenzie to be followed by Margaret McDougall with speeches of 4 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, I regret that I was unable to take part in last week's debate on payday loans, but I listened to it with interest, and I found myself agreeing almost completely with Kezia Dugdale. But my only point of disagreement is that Kezia and our colleagues in the Labour benches seem content to allow the UK coalition to keep on hammering the Scottish people at every turn, whilst apparently trying to suggest that the only solution to that lies with the Scottish Government. That's just not credible. It's just not a credible proposition that the Scottish Government, with limited resources, can ameliorate all the harm being done by the Tories and the Lib Dems. It's a bit like asking the Scottish Government to continually go and chase after escaped horses, while the UK Government stubbornly refused to lock the stable. And the obvious solution is for the UK Government to continue to pay attention to Mr Ewing's call for them to cap interest rates on payday and similar loans. And, Presiding Officer, it's against the background of what most commentators are now calling the Great Recession, and in the face of these exorbitant loans which the UK Government refused to regulate, it's hardly surprising that over the last few years, until recently, the number of personal bankruptcies has been increasing, although the latest figures apparently show that we may have turned a corner in this respect, with, I understand, the last year's numbers of bankruptcies down by about 30%. But I would suggest that we need to treat these figures with some caution, especially as the UK Government's welfare reforms are bound to bring about increasing financial difficulties as these come down the track. And against this difficult background, the Scottish Government have to be congratulated in continuing to refine the debt arrangement scheme. And it offers a very constructive alternative to personal bankruptcy, where it's possible for a debtor to repay the money owed, given a reasonable time in which to do so. And indeed, the increases in the debt payment plans approved under this scheme may be part of the reason for the reduction in personal bankruptcies. This is an infinitely preferable solution, both for debtors and creditors, who will at least see their original debts repaid. I'm delighted that the successive reviews of the DAS scheme indicate how it can be improved in ways which strike a balance between the needs of debtors and of creditors. And it's only right that, given the time it sometimes takes to approve debt payment plans, that interest and other charges are frozen at the start of the application process rather than the end. Presiding Officer, I'll conclude by suggesting that the real person who needs counselling from a money advisor is George Osborne. The problem with very rich people like Mr Osborne is that they never have to think about money. And never thinking about it, they never come to understand it. A debt payment plan for the UK is urgently required. And any money advisor would advise Mr Osborne that this should be over a suitable period. Attempting to repay debts too quickly will not work. And we're presented with new evidence that Mr Osborne's plan isn't working every day.
Many thanks. I now call on Margaret McDougall to be followed by Jamie Hepburn.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Under current regulations, the Debt Arrangement Scheme allows debt owed to payday lenders to be included in the scheme, along with priority debts such as mortgage and rent arrears or energy bills. This is a good idea in principle when it comes to priority debts, as it allows the person to pay off the debt in line with their disposable income, and any creditors must abide by the legislation offering the debtor some protection. Short-term payday loans can, independent of any other debts, cripple a person's finances. In many cases, people are taking out another loan to pay off the interest on the first, so that they find it necessary to enter into a debt arrangement scheme. However, this highlights a key issue with the DAS. As the Cabinet Secretary said, the setting up process can take months. It involves finding an approved money advisor, agreeing paybacks, approving a DAS and entering the arrangement onto the DAS register, which all takes time. While this is happening, the interest is accruing on the payday loan, putting the person deeper in debt. Currently, the average time to pay off debts by DAS is 8 years and 5 months, and during this time, your credit rating is destroyed. In other words, you are blacklisted. So it is vitally important to have the debts paid off as quickly as possible, so the debtor can return to some financial normality. So I very much welcome the Cabinet Secretary's announcement today to freeze interest at the point of applying for a DAS. Irresponsible lending has a contaminating effect not only on the lives of debtors, but also on the viability of DAS and on those creditors taking their responsibilities seriously. Yet, up till now, the Scottish Government has consistently refused to take action on payday loans, arguing that the way to tackle this is through the Consumer Credit Act. While greater regulation is necessary as regards the particular issue of payday loans as part of DAS, the Scottish Government has power to act if it wants to. It could do more to warn against the dangers of high-interest lending, like payday loans, through its social advertising fund and money advice networks. It shouldn't be left up to the Daily Record, although I very much welcome the leaflet today. And it could provide more support to credit unions so they can offer affordable and accessible alternatives like the Guarantee Loan Fund. The Govan Law Centre has proposed a separate fast-track DAS that should be set up exclusively for payday loans in order to prevent the devaluation of what is a sensible scheme and a vital lifeline to those trapped in a debilitating cycle of debt. This DAS could exclusively deal with payday loans and be a viable option to pay off these loans within 2 years, rather than taking 8 years to pay off what was effectively a short-term loan solution. High interest and rollover charges could be suspended and written off following a successful repayment of the debt. This way, payday loans could be effectively tackled within the context of the DAS. So I urge the Cabinet Secretary to at least consider this proposal. The Scottish Government has the powers to advise people against using payday loans and to support credit unions as a reliable alternative, and should use these powers now. I also urge the Cabinet Secretary to consider the Govan Law Centre proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Jamie Hepburn to be followed by Chick Brodie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I at the outset say I very much welcome this debate, because I think we'll all be aware
of having had a number of constituents approach us with concerns about the indebtedness they find themselves in, and that can always be a very difficult subject matter to deal with. And I think, especially at this time of year, the early part of any year is always a difficult time for families, so I don't think it will be any surprise that last week we had a cost of living debate, and this week we're having a debate about the debt arrangement scheme. And clearly, I'm saying any year, the start of any year is a difficult time. I think that could be fairly said to be true, but I think the current situation is also particularly exacerbating these matters. We are aware that the economic downturn is adding increased pressure to household budgets. That is a process that is being further exacerbated by, I think, the welfare reform agenda we see emanating from Westminster. It's very likely that that is going to increase the pressure on families. It's going to see an increased likelihood of families turning to the payday loan companies that have been referred to throughout this debate, and in last week's debate they will see them as an attractive option. And we all know that going to such can lead to problems. So I suppose, given that as the background, I suppose that might be why this debate is largely consensual. I'll try to stick to that theme, although there have been a few things said that I disagree with. And it's clear that the debt arrangement scheme is working well. We see the number of debt payment programmes that were approved in 2005-06 were 149. By 11-12 it was 3,319, and indeed there have been 3,655 so far in this year. And I think that indicates a level of success, because there could have been real problems befalling those families if there had been no debt arrangement scheme. And I think it is therefore right to build on that success, and I very much welcome the changes that the Minister has announced today. I think that will definitely enhance the programme. We also see the intent of the Government to bring forward a bankruptcy bill, which I understand will have the DAS very much at its heart. So it's clear that the debt arrangement scheme features prominently as an important tool to help people on the ground. There have been a number of references to the fact that the Scottish Government has powers over these matters, and to an extent that is right, and that's set out in the Labour amendment. They have frequently, and I think they made this point in the last debate last week, that the Government could use its advertising budget to do so. And I thought it was interesting that Margaret McDougall made the point that it was great the Daily Record, and I agree, it is great the Daily Record has published its supplement today, but actually, if you look at the supplement, that is precisely what the Scottish Government has done, because I've got a copy in front here, and on the very back page there is an advert from the Scottish Government. On the inside front page there is a message from Fergus Ewing. So if that isn't the Scottish Government using its resources in the manner that has been requested, I don't know what is. And in terms of action and payday loans, I think we should recognise that it is the Scottish Government's powers are somewhat limited in this regard, although I do recognise that Fergus Ewing has written to the UK Government to call for action in that regard. And let me just say briefly, I thought it was interesting that there was a suggestion by Ken McIntosh that one thing we could do is close down payday loan outlets, which I think is a superficially attractive thing to do. I think it would be better to regulate that industry, because at the end of the day these are people that are still going to be in trouble, and if there is not an outlet like that, where are these people going to go? And I know the response will be credit unions, but we do see that the credit union sector has been supported by the Scottish Government, some £12 million invested between 2008 and 2010. So I think it would be wrong if anyone watching this debate had the impression that the Scottish Government isn't doing what it can with the powers it had. I wish this Government had more powers to act further.
Thank you. I now call Chick Brodie to be followed by Hanzala Malik.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, it's surely a sign of the times that last week we discussed payday loans and today the debt arrangement scheme. The DAS has £76.2 million worth of debt now to be paid back, and approval of the debt payment programme has risen from 149 items to 3,319 in 2011-2012. I also think, regrettably, because I believe this is a very important programme and should have consensuality, it's a sign of the times that Mr Johnson is sitting there like the Lone Ranger with no Tonto, in that there are no other members of, or maybe it should be Hardy with no Laurel, with no members of the coalition to understand how we in this chamber feel about this very particular subject. And if any set of circumstances crystallises the need for greater Scottish Government control over, among many other things, the guidelines, the rules and the laws governing business and personal debtor-creditor interrelationships, then these are them. And again, I say in the spirit of consensuality, when will the opposition finally accept that when it comes to economics in particular, the circumstances, the competency and the culture of Westminster rule is wholly incompatible with our shared Scottish values, beliefs and abilities. Now, different from individual circumstances, which in many ways are much more serious, I had the fortune or misfortune to run several businesses, and from my previous personal involvement as a company troubleshooter, was many times confronted by debt sometimes as large as in 6 figures, a debt mountain which grew larger daily because of penal interest charges and because of an intransigent creditor, which was normally a major bank. And as I say, it's much more serious when it comes down to the individual. So I welcome the motion today, and I say we have to overcome the recurring disasters where individuals meet their debts and pay their creditors by incurring further debt, hidden debt, by obtaining the funding to secure that debt through unscrupulous, non-regulated payday lenders and creditors. So DAS, introduced in 2004, is a strong debt management scheme to help assuage debt, and in 2011 it still provides a vehicle to protect both person and home from creditor threat. But, Presiding Officer, that can only be achieved if there is no continued or incremental interest or fee charges which continues to make the debt grow, even in the face of regular payments to an approved payment distributor. So I welcome the motion's intent to bring in the date at which interest and fee charges will be frozen from approval to, hopefully, application, and then to studying in detail the intended mechanism so that we may disseminate the benefits to those we seek to represent. That action, of course, implies a more rigorous and perhaps due diligence on the performance of creditors or potential creditors and the slowing down of the cycle of cash flow. Presiding Officer, increasing debt, punitive debt, also has a potential disruption to that cash cycle through bankruptcy, the threat of which, through this improved scheme, is happily less likely. And while creditors are still entitled to take action to enforce payment under voluntary debt payment programmes, the debt arrangement scheme provides real additional security. Individual debtors are responsible, I believe, for their own indebtedness, just as creditors are responsible for their diligence, their risk assessment and their credit provision. However, in these straitened times where there is unintended debt liability, the Government does have a responsibility to provide mechanisms to protect both debtor and bona fide creditors. That's why I believe this improved scheme will do that, and why I am pleased to support it.
Thank you. I now call Hanzala Malik to be followed by Willie Coffey.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I am pleased to take part in today's debate and in support of the Labour Party's amendment by Ken McIntosh on motion S4M 05586.1. The debt arrangement scheme has been an important statutory tool over the last 9 years, and we recognise that fact. However, the economic situation has changed since the creation of the scheme, and it is not just banks but other high street lenders are now on the scene. High street stores, building societies and the like, giving many opportunities for many to acquire debt. When people need money urgently, even a 1,000% interest rate does not put people off if they do not know other places to go to. And communities, from the minority communities in particular, suffer greater hardship. I'm referring to communities who are either not very good in English or newcomers to Scotland, refugees, and the vulnerable society amongst us. The Citizens Advice Bureau data states that 400 people a day are coming to them for debt advice, giving us some idea of the number of Scots worried about debt today. People going bankrupt, families suffering hardship, the misery that that creates is untenable. And people who find themselves in that trap always find that there are less places that they can go to for assistance. And therefore, it's absolutely imperative that without better financial literacy, things may and could get much worse. I fear that the introduction of universal credit means that many vulnerable people could choose to pay off high-interest debts rather than their rent. That in itself has huge implications. It could lead to the eviction of families, homelessness, and all sorts of difficulties in our society today as we know it. I think we need to recognize the fact that there are a lot of people out there who have difficulties in managing resource. And without statutory assistance, it will be even greater difficult. They will face even greater difficulties. And hence, introducing proper legislative safeguards is important. I believe that raising awareness of affordable alternatives such as credit unions is a matter of urgency, and we must take action. Now, a lot of people in the past have always felt that credit unions are something for small debts, for families in housing associations or vulnerable society. But I can assure you, it's a very vital support line for many families in Scotland today. And the user-friendly attitude from the credit unions, they need to be credited for the work that they do. Fantastic work gets done. A lot of families benefit from it. And therefore, I believe that credit unions need to be supported even more than we have done so in the past. So, Presiding Officer, in conclusion, what I really want to say is that this is a very serious issue. And I'm glad I'm taking part in this debate, and I'm glad I'm taking part in the amendment as well, because I believe that these are really worthwhile. It's very, very important we support our communities. This is one of the best ways I think we can do. We must move forward in making sure that we have got everything in place to support a vulnerable community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I now call Willie Coffey.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer, and I speak as a proud member of the Kilmarnock Credit Union for a number of years now. Whilst those looking in the debate from outside might not exactly be enthralled by it, it's very important to highlight the problems of many thousands of Scots caught up in the spiral of debt. Debt can end careers, it can destroy families, and it can ruin one's health. And we shouldn't underestimate the importance of trying to help people to take responsibility to manage what some may regard as an inevitable consequence of the times we live in. There can be no doubt that some companies are lying in wait to strike when people are at their most vulnerable and need immediate access to cash. As the Minister said in his opening remarks, well over 1 million people in the UK took out about 4 million of these payday loans in 2009 to the tune of over £1 billion. A Scottish estimate of this perhaps would possibly be that some 100,000 Scots borrowed over £100 million through these schemes in that year. People are turning to these schemes because they appear more attractive than traditional borrowing routes like the banks. In some cases, they may well be, but the business model for payday loans in particular assumes a percentage of those taking out the schemes will go on to extend the loans, roll them over, and thus compound the debt problems many times over. It's at this point, I think, that people need help from the government, the UK government in this case, to provide the necessary regulation to stop the exploitation of debt from becoming a booming industry and delivering further misery to already vulnerable people. Whilst some progress has been made by the current UK government, for example, introducing new codes of practice for the industry and transferring the regulation for the OFT to the new Financial Conduct Authority, the UK government seems unwilling to take some of the steps that other countries have taken to impose caps on charges and costs, an opportunity also missed by the previous Labour administration at the UK. As the Minister also informed us, countries like France and Finland do have measures that either cap charges or apply interest rate ceilings. And I understand that payday loan schemes are outlawed altogether in some states in America. So turning to the powers that the Scottish Government has, we can act in matters relating to the enforcement of debt. And through the debt arrangement scheme, implemented in 2004, as explained by the member, and updated again by this Government in 2011, we can provide some degree of protection for consumers to help them manage their debts better, without the fear of their debts running out of control and resulting in debt spiralling, court action and worse. Some of the changes that were introduced in 2011 were, for example, widening the money advice gateway to give us more approved organisations managing the schemes, notwithstanding the comments that was made by Kezia Dugdale earlier. We allow applications from couples with joint liabilities, and we also introduced the possibility of debt payment holidays for up to 6 months. These have all helped a great deal, I think, and appears to be borne out by the number of debt payment plans that are now in place. Under the scheme in 2011-12, there were over 3,300 plans in place, compared to about 1,400 or so immediately prior to those reviews. So, proposals this year to continue improving the debt arrangement scheme via the Scottish Government's Bankruptcy Reform Bill should bring even more comfort to people who will no doubt continue to access these loan schemes. The intention, as has been stated by other members, is to freeze interest and charges from the date of application to the creditors rather than the date of approval of the payment plans. And this will further help hard-pressed consumers in Scotland who are struggling to repay those debts. These measures, Presiding Officer, go a considerable way to offering hope to many thousands of Scots who are facing problems with debt. But we all know that to really address the issues about consumer debt and punitive interest charges, we do need the UK Government to take similar effective action that others have taken and to bring an end to the misery caused by debt spiralling. I have no doubt that our Minister will act in the event of a yes vote to introduce these powers to our independent Parliament, which will convene in 2016. And in the meantime, I am delighted to support the Scottish Government's measures proposed.
Thank you. That brings us to the closing speeches, and I call on Alex Johnson with up to 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. This is a very serious subject, and it's not actually a debate in which there is really any place for levity, but I'm reminded of an old joke. And it was a joke that was used to have attacked bankers in my day, but lenders of any kind could be applied to, and that is that there is a tendency among bankers to only wish to lend money to people who don't actually need it. And as a result, people who do need it find it very hard to borrow money. Now, I, like many people in this room, will have a mortgage, I've got a car loan, and that's because I pay them back regularly and as required, that means that I'm a safe bet. And every day I get things through my door trying to lend me more money, money I don't want, money that's so cheap I should find a job for it. So cheap money is available out there. The problem is that the other side of this joke, not very funny I know, is that those who need money are the ones who can't find it and find themselves having to pay through the nose to get it. The truth is that those who need money and can't afford it are the ones who are being exploited. And that's a sad situation which actually undermines the viability of our economy in the long term. And that's why, while there are many different political attitudes, many different economic attitudes to how the country should be run around this chamber, an intense dislike for that exploitation and a desire to find a way to bring it to an end is something which unites us all and will unite us all in supporting this motion at 5 o'clock tonight. Looking at the debate that we've had, there are a number of issues which I think I should address at this stage, because I agree with what other people have had to say in most cases. The issue of advertising was raised, and I think it is important that more people know about what is available to them under the terms of the debt arrangement scheme and what is likely to become more available as time goes on. It is sad that there are people who could exploit the arrangements that are available and yet simply don't know that they exist. That takes me on to the point which has been raised by one or two and I thought was dwelt on terribly by the Minister in his opening speech, and that is the contribution of the Daily Record in the handbook that they have published today. Now, I think Margaret McDougall was the one that said that it shouldn't be left to the Daily Record to publish a handbook. But I would almost be inclined to disagree with her, because sometimes I disagree with what they write in the Daily Record. In fact, often I disagree with what they write in the Daily Record. But as a campaigning newspaper, with a tremendous record of working within the community with which it identifies, I think it is wonderful that the opportunity was taken to publish that handbook. And I think it is a sound example of what newspapers like that should be doing in ensuring that the people that read that paper have the information they require. So I would join the Minister and others in the Chamber in commending what they have done. But longer term, it will be necessary for the Government to support this by doing a little more than simply taking out a couple of adverts on the book that was published. So consequently, I think it is vital that the Government look at how this information can be spread far and wide, even beyond the areas that the Daily Record can reach. As I said, we've all come together in this debate, and I look forward to the opportunity to vote for this motion when the decision time comes. But there are key principles that we must adopt that go along with this desire. We need to find ways to cut demand for high-interest lending. We need to promote the availability of alternatives to high-interest lending. But we also need to evolve the debt arrangement scheme to make sure that it fits need, and that is what we're doing, or beginning to do, with this process today. I look forward to supporting this motion. I commend my amendment, and I look forward to the future legislation which will come forward.
Thank you. I now call on Kezia Dugdale, up to 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I first wrote to Fergus Ewing back on the 8th of May about high-interest short-term lending, asking him to introduce, or at least look at, wealth warnings on payday loans. I said we advertise health warnings all the time: don't eat fatty foods, don't drink too much, take regular exercise. Why can't we do that with wealth warnings, warning against the dangers of payday loans and promoting alternatives? He wrote back to me on the 29th of May, and in his letter he said it would not be appropriate for the Scottish Government to undertake an advertising campaign to advise the public of the issues in the high-interest short-term loan market. Being somebody who doesn't like being told no, Presiding Officer, I wrote again to the Minister and received a reply again on the 1st of August to a letter I'd sent in June. In this letter, the Minister again refused to look at my idea of health warnings on payday loans, and this time he says, with regards to using the Government's advertising budget to provide wealth warnings, I must reiterate the comments I made in my letter to you dated 29th of May that it is not appropriate for the Scottish Government to discourage people from obtaining credit which is offered to them in a legal, fair and transparent way. So, Presiding Officer, when I saw today's Daily Record pull-out, I thought it was absolutely fantastic. It's exactly the type of thing that we need. But then I looked at the front cover with the Scottish Government logo on it, the logo for accountant in bankruptcy, and the first thing it says on the front cover is avoid the payday lenders with more sensible solutions. On the inside page, there is indeed an introduction from the Minister himself, and I quote, borrowing from so-called payday lenders may be an attractive option in some cases, but the reality for many is that high interest rates prevent repayment within the terms of the loan. He then goes on to say, in this booklet you will find information about debt arrangement schemes and access to more affordable credit through credit unions. Fantastic, exactly what I wanted the Minister to do. So I say to Jamie Hepburn, please have sympathy with the opposition sometimes when we despair a little at the state of politics, its very self. I've spent months having the Minister discredit my ideas, only for to see in the Daily Record today the Government adopt them. Sometimes it's difficult on this side of the House to see that and lose faith in politics in the more general sense. So, sure, Jamie Hepburn.
It's just to point out that my sympathy for the opposition is limitless.
Kezia Dugdale.
You're too kind, Jamie. You're too kind. So the question is, Presiding Officer, what will the Government do today? It might find itself in the position where it has to vote against Labour's amendment, and in doing so it will vote against exactly the type of social advertising that's done in today's Daily Record. It will also vote against money for credit unions, which is exactly what John Swinney promised Margot MacDonald he would do in the budget statement yesterday. So if the Government are going to do that, can I please, in the most sincere sense, ask the Minister to work with Labour on this issue, get us round the table, let us share our ideas on how to address this problem. We really are trying to do this in the best of faith. I would also say to the Minister that he organised a roundtable with various money advice groups on the 17th of January, and he promised them another roundtable on payday loans. I waited and waited for that event to take place. It took months and months. And when it came to September and it hadn't taken place, I organised my own roundtable on payday loan lending. I invited various money advice organisations from around Scotland, government agencies, charities, the STUC, the Church of Scotland, Govan Law Centre, the Co-op Party, the Law Society of Scotland. Everybody was there. And at that meeting, Mike Daly and the Govan Law Centre presented what we called a fast-track debt arrangement scheme. This was a scheme which was to recognise that it can take 2.5 or 3 months to get a debt arrangement scheme set up. And for people who have payday loan debt, that is very, very difficult because obviously the interest rate is accruing all the time. That proposal was a fast-track debt arrangement scheme. I'm sorry, Mr Mackenzie, I really don't have a lot of time today. So imagine my surprise when the Government then took that idea and produced what they have today, introducing a freeze at a much earlier stage in the debt arrangement scheme to remove that anomaly of interest still being charged in 2.5–3 months between the minute you apply from a debt arrangement scheme and the scheme being set up. So again, I congratulate the Government on doing that, but I would ask them to recognise that there's an idea we were floating for several months beforehand. So, Presiding Officer, in the vain attempt to put another idea to the Minister in the hope that he will rubbish it for a couple of months and then agree to do it, can I ask him to consider the fact that some of what the debt arrangement scheme is trying to do might actually increase the amount of money paid to payday loan companies? And let me try and explain this to him. If you take out a £100 loan from a credit union and you're charged 26% APR for 3 months, you'll pay back £108. If you take £100 from Wonga for 3 months at an interest rate of 4,200%, you will pay back £1,050. That's before the levies and the fees and the administration charges are topped on that. What happens when you go into a debt arrangement scheme is all those interest fees, all those debt, all those extra charges are lumped into the capital sum that you've been lent, and that is what you seek back from the debt arrangement scheme. Payday loan companies are going to profit out of the debt arrangement scheme if we're not very, very careful. So I would ask him to look at the possibility of separating out capital from interest charged. He could make sure the scheme addressed the capital load so that payday loan companies get that back and the credit unions get that back, but treat the interest in a slightly different manner. So it's an idea, and I would ask him to consider it and return to it at a later date. Another thing I'm concerned about, Presiding Officer, is that if you do have substantial debt, you end up on a debt register. At the moment, it's possible for marketing companies to access that register and phone you up and ask you whether you would like help from a private company to file for bankruptcy. These companies are profiting out of people in extremely dire financial circumstances. I wonder, therefore, whether the Government could look to making it illegal to sell that information, that data, onto private companies for them to exploit. I believe it's within the Government's power. I hope it's something that he can look at in the bankruptcy bill, and I hope that in putting these two ideas before the Government, he can see that we are presenting them in the most genuine sense, because it's simply not the case that we can wait any longer to act on payday loan companies. I get the points from the SNP backbenches about waiting for independence or the need to regulate. I've said many times in this chamber to point to the work in Westminster that Stella Creasy is doing around regulation, but we can't wait for a change of government in 2015, and we can't wait for independence in 2016. Think of the interest that will be charged in 2–2.5 years if we don't act now on people who take out these small loans. He has to do more today. I've put some ideas to him about how we can do that. Please work with us on this issue. These are legal loan sharks, Presiding Officer. They're exploiting vulnerable families across the country. The Minister has the ability to crack down on legal loan sharking, and I ask him to look to do that today.
Thank you. I now call on Fergus Ewing to wind up the debate. Minister, you have until just before 5.
Presiding Officer, I've thoroughly enjoyed this debate, and I do think that there is a sort of consensus sort of struggling to emerge from the debate this afternoon. I wanted to start off by just undertaking to all members who have made contributions in this debate of a varied nature that the Accountant of Bankruptcy and myself will study carefully what has been said, because there have been a wide range of points raised, and I'm, as the Minister, determined to ensure that we do listen to Parliament and specifically look at any specific constructive proposals that emerge in these debates, so that they do have purpose. And I think a number of specific proposals have emerged during debate. I think there is a great consensus that payday loans do represent a contemporary, growing and widespread problem, which has very serious consequences. And the numbers that have been referred to of 4 million payday loans in 2009 and rising illustrate that this is a very serious problem. And I think it is accepted, irrespective of differences about the constitutional future of our country, that the powers to address these matters do largely rest with Westminster. It is a sadness to me that these powers haven't been used by the current and previous government, and it is, I think, unfortunate, deeply unfortunate that that is the case. And I would prefer that the powers rest here. And I think I've made these points very clearly. But I'm not going to dwell on them, Presiding Officer, because I think what people who are following this debate, particularly in the light of the Daily Record's marvellous contribution, which has been praised by all parties, I think what people are interested in is what can we do now to help? I think there have been a number of suggestions, and I will take all of them away. And first of all, could I just respond to the amendments? The Conservative amendment asks us to work with the UK Government to increase awareness of the Scottish Debt Arrangement Scheme with creditors based in the rest of the UK. Yes, we are doing that, I believe, and we will continue to do that. And I think it was just shortly before Christmas that I am meeting with a number of banks, most of whose operations are south of the border, to engage with them to see to what extent they are able to at least inform their customers who are in difficulty that the debt arrangement scheme exists. Now, this is a difficult problem because of their legal duties constrain them in pointing customers towards a particular direction, but that, I think, is the type of engagement that I think Alex Johnson would expect me to have, and indeed I think it is right that I do. So we are working very closely with the major creditors who appear time and again in the bankruptcy claims list or protected trust deeds list, and who are the major creditors in most consumers' affairs. So we will be supporting the Conservative amendment tonight. So far as the Labour's amendment is concerned, I started off with the mindset of wanting to support it this evening. And of course we are supportive of and are already doing all the things that we can, which we are urged to do in this amendment. We work very closely with local authorities. We do warn of the consequences which, for some people, payday loans can have. And I've always done that, actually, in the first debate, I think the first members' debate in this session of Parliament back in 2011 was by Margaret Burgess, now a Minister, who spoke with passion about her deep knowledge of this area. And I responded as the Minister, and I think, with all respect to Kessa Dovedale's comments, I made my position about payday loans very clear then. And my position hasn't changed, and it's remained exactly as it was ever since. And I think that position is shared by the vast majority of members. The difficulty about the Labour amendment is twofold. It invites us to curb high-interest short-term lending. Sadly, we don't have the powers to do that, and we cannot, therefore, adopt that as a proposition which we know we cannot implement. And secondly, rather than asking us to consider a particular measure of a guaranteed loan fund, it says that there should be a guaranteed loan fund. Now, I cannot, as a Minister, accept in an amendment an uncosted and open-ended commitment. However, that being the precise legal position, otherwise I would then be bound to implement it, and no doubt the Labour members would very quickly urge me to do so, and that's opposition. That's the way oppositions are, and I was no different. However, what I will do is ensure that this proposal, if the members wish to discuss it with me at the meeting I've already agreed to have with Kessa Dovedale, or in any other respect, I'm happy to meet with the Labour Party spokespeople, because we all want to achieve the same things. So I hope that that's an explanation, and it doesn't really matter that the amendment will not be supported by us today, because we will look very closely at that idea. Although it did transmogrify, I have to say, during Mr McIntosh's response to my intervention, from a guaranteed loan fund to the possibility of underwriting a loan, which is somewhat different. But nonetheless, I'm happy to look at any options that emerge from that process. Yes, I certainly will.
Hanzala Malik.
Thank you very much, Minister. I'm a little puzzled when you say that we can't legislate in terms of the level of pegging in terms of interest rates. I thought that we could legislate in this Parliament in terms of how far we would allow banks to go in terms of loans. Could you perhaps shed some more light on that?
Minister.
Well, I think, just to respond to Mr Malik, that the power to control interest rates is a reserved matter. We do not have the power to introduce a cap on payday loans, and in my opening speech I alluded to the fact that in France and Finland, in many of the states of the United States of America, in Canada, in many other states or countries, there are thresholds, and they have been applied. We don't have the power to do that in this country, and I think that your party and Mr Malik's party and mine would like to have these powers, but that is a matter that I've already covered, and I want to I think I really want to respond to some of the points in the debate with respect. It was said, concern was raised about the availability of money advice throughout the country, and this is an important matter. Before 2011, there were 135 approved advisers throughout the country. Since 2011, when we changed the law in this respect, and we didn't approve individual advisers, but organisations that offer money advice and are suitably qualified to ensure that the people that work for them can provide accredited and professional money advice. There are now 105 approved money adviser organisations, and these include, for example, I'll give away in a second, the Citizens Advice, the Money Advice Scotland, local authorities and many private sector bodies. So I think we are better served in respect of the availability of money advice, but there's more work to be done in that respect. Councillor Dugdale.
I wonder whether the Minister would recognise, though, that of those 105 that he mentions, 22 are in the private sector and therefore profiting from offering debt advice, and ideally what we would like to have are more debt advisers in the public sector, and that's what Labour has been putting forward today. Minister.
Well, I think there are a number of very good and excellent indeed money advisers in the public sector. However, the private sector does play an important role, and I think we have to recognise that. And the top 10 DAS-approved advisor organisations include several private sector organisations. I think what we want, Presiding Officer, is a partnership between the public and private sectors in order to ensure that the appropriate advice is available. And of course, it goes beyond the debt arrangement scheme. The other options which may be appropriate for individuals as a last resort include bankruptcy or the protected trust deed. In some cases, some of the work that is required to be undertaken to administer either a protected trust deed or bankruptcy do involve a qualified insolvency petitioner, especially those cases of complexity. Therefore, there is indeed a role for the private sector. Presiding Officer, reference was made, I think, by Mike Mackenzie to the fact that the numbers of sequestrations in Scotland have reduced. And I think Mr Mackenzie made the link between the welcome modest but welcome reduction in the number of personal sequestrations in Scotland and the growth, particularly over the last couple of years, in the number of people entering debt arrangement schemes. And this is a very important point that Mr Mackenzie identified. I mean, there were only 128 people who entered into debt arrangement schemes in 2005-06. 128. Last year it was 3,319. This year, and of course there's February and March to go, so 1/6 of the year is yet to elapse, but this year so far there are 3,900 people entering the arrangement scheme. What is the significance of this? The significance of this is around 4,000 people in Scotland, as opposed to just over 100, are now adopting the Scottish Government's scheme, designed to help them pay their debts off, not seek to get off their debts, get free of their debts under bankruptcy or protected trust deeds, but to pay their debts off in full over time. Now, that change is a very major change in our society. I think it's to be welcomed because all of us believe that those who can pay their debts should pay their debts. And perhaps it indicates that some individuals previously were entering into options of debt relief instead of debt management. In other words, they were not paying their debts to creditors where, in fact, some could. So this, Presiding Officer, I think is proof positive that the debt arrangement scheme, which we have been debating today, it has been a success, and I very much welcome the cross-party support for that. The announcement that we've made today, that we will extend further and that we will improve further the debt arrangement scheme, has been welcomed by all parties, and I'm very appreciative of the support that we've had from the other parties in this chamber. And we will be bringing forward the statutory instrument for consideration by the relevant committee so that it can be made law by summer. Could I just conclude, Presiding Officer, by once again paying tribute to the Daily Record for their excellent journal here, to Fergus Muirhead, Christine Sinclair and Kelly Gallagher, who have provided the advice in the Daily Record's booklet. No one would accuse me of shamelessness, I'm quite sure. At any time, Presiding Officer, we have all united in supporting the Daily Record this afternoon, and I'm very pleased that I'm doing so as the Minister responsible.
Thank you very much. That concludes the debate on the debt arrangement scheme. And it's now time to move on to the next item of business, which is consideration of a Parliamentary Bureau motion. I would ask Joe Fitzpatrick to move motion number 5595 on approval of an SSI.
Formally moved.
Thank you very much. The question on this motion will be put at decision time, to which we now come. There are 5 questions to be put as a result of today's business. The first question is that motion 5549 in the name of John Swinney on approval of the Local Government Finance Scotland Order 2013 draft be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. I'm going to call that vote again. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we will move to a vote. Members should cast their votes now. Order. The result of the vote on motion number 5549 in the name of John Swinney is yes 72, no 36, and there were 2 abstentions. The motion is therefore agreed to. The next question is that Amendment 5. Order. The next question is that Amendment 5586.1 in the name of Ken Macintosh, which seeks to amend motion number 5586 in the name of Fergus Ewing on the debt arrangement scheme, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we will move to a vote, and members should cast their votes now, please. The result of the vote on amendment number 5586.1 in the name of Ken Macintosh is yes 37, no 64. There were 8 abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. The next question is that amendment 5586.2 in the name of Alex Johnson, which seeks to amend motion number 5586 in the name of Fergus Ewing on the debt arrangement scheme, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is therefore agreed. The fourth question is that motion 5586 in the name of Fergus Ewing as amended on the debt arrangement scheme be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is therefore agreed. And the next question is that motion 5595 in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick on approval of an SSI be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed to. That concludes decision time, and I now close this meeting of Parliament.